Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into a case from Russia, one that's truly perplexing, quite brutal actually. A story that basically haunted a whole region for, nearly a decade.
That's right. Almost 8 years. It's a complex one.
And our mission today really is to try and grasp the whole picture, what she did, how the investigation unfolded, or maybe didn't unfold for a long time, and, the human side behind all the shocking headlines. So try to imagine this, these quiet, almost sleepy towns in Russia's Sverdlovsk Oblast. And for years, there's this shadow hanging over them, something terrifying that was preying on the most vulnerable people, elderly women living by themselves.
Yeah, and these weren't just random isolated things. It was a pattern, a really horrifying string of attacks that had people genuinely scared and frankly left the police stumped for way too long.
Exactly. And this brings us to Irina Viktorovna Gaidamachuk, a name that became linked with these awful nicknames: Satan in a skirt, the she-wolf of Krasnoyarsk, responsible for the deaths of 17 women, and she tried to take another life, too.
17.
It's a staggering number.
It really is. So the big question is, how? How could this incredibly brutal series of crimes go unsolved for such a long time? And what is it about this case that feels so uniquely disturbing, even when you look at other awful criminal histories?
Well, I think what's truly fascinating here, in a grim way, is how deep her motivations were. Almost primal, you could say.
Primal?
Driven by this intense need. But also, crucially, how societal assumptions, just basic biases, can completely derail an investigation, led them way off track.
Okay.
And that, allowed someone who seemed, on the surface, totally ordinary to hide right there in plain sight for a shocking amount of time.
Hiding in plain sight.
The sheer normalcy of her everyday life was just such a stark contrast to the horrific violence she was carrying out. And that really challenges how we think about who's capable of these things, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It forced everyone, investigators, the public, to really question their ideas about women and violence. Exactly. And that contrast, like you said, it's just the start of how unsettling this whole thing gets. It makes you rethink where danger can come from.
Okay, so let's start with her, the perpetrator herself.
Yeah.
Irina Gaidamachuk, born in 1972, Nyagin, Soviet Union back then. So she was, 39 when they finally arrested her in 2010?
39.
And like you said, on the surface, totally ordinary, married, a mother, 2 kids, just living a life that, most people would probably just glance at and think nothing of.
Right. Unremarkable.
But underneath that, this just shocking, brutal reality, a reality that took the authorities nearly a whole decade to finally uncover. And think of the cost. All those innocent lives lost while she was operating.
It's such a vivid example, isn't it? How easy it can be for someone truly dangerous to just blend in when they don't fit the mold we expect.
Yeah, the stereotype.
Precisely. Her sort of unassuming background was her camouflage, basically. It let her operate for so long because nobody was looking for someone like her. She was part of the community she was terrorizing, turning that sort of neighborly trust, that vulnerability against her victims. It's a really chilling reminder that appearances can be just so incredibly deceptive.
It is terrifying. The idea that someone who seems so normal could do these monstrous things, you almost want there to be a sign, something obvious.
But there often isn't.
No. And as we dig in, the driving force becomes clearer, though it's tragic. It seems to boil down to this overwhelming grip of severe alcohol addiction.
A very severe addiction.
And this wasn't something new for her. Apparently, it started when she was really young. So young and so severe that her own parents actually lost parental authority over her, which is just heartbreaking in itself.
Yeah, that points to a really deep-rooted issue starting very early. That kind of dependency, established so young, really set the stage for the desperation that came later.
And here's where it gets, I think, really compelling in a disturbing way. The sheer lengths addiction can push someone. How it can just warp them into someone unrecognizable. Her husband, Yuri, he reportedly knew how bad her drinking was, knew it was destructive. So he refused to give her money because he figured, rightly probably, she'd just spend it immediately on vodka.
A desperate measure on his part, trying to manage it.
Yeah, but that refusal, that attempt to control it, inadvertently became the central, devastating motive for her crimes. She turned to theft and ultimately violence, not for big money, not for riches.
No, not at all.
But purely to get small amounts, ridiculously small amounts, to buy alcohol.
It's a truly unsettling imbalance, isn't it? The extreme brutality she used versus these tiny sums of money. We're talking, maybe 500 to 1,000 rubles per victim?
Which is like 10, 20 pounds, maybe?
Exactly. pennies almost. And across all 17 victims, the total was maybe around 50,000 rubles, roughly 1,000 pounds.
1,000 pounds for 17 lives.
It's staggering. It wasn't about getting rich or some grand plan. It was just this raw, desperate need for alcohol driving her to these horrific acts for pocket change.
Just pocket change.
And it raises that really difficult question for society, doesn't it? How do we deal with addiction when it gets this destructive? Not just for the person suffering, but for everyone else caught in the fallout.
Right.
The scale of violence for such trivial sums is just chilling.
It's almost impossible to reconcile. The violence and the motive seem so disconnected in scale. And, while the alcohol addiction was always cited as the main driver by police,
That was the primary motive.
there was this other alleged motive floating around in some reports. A theory that maybe she felt guilty about abandoning her older daughter, Alina.
Right, I remember reading about that.
Yeah, Alina was given up to an orphanage when she was, 21? And Irina barely visited her. So some speculated she was maybe doing this to get money to send to Alina, like a twisted form of making amends.
It's a possibility, I suppose. Adds another layer.
It does, but it's important to stress the main motive authorities focused on was always the alcohol. But just the fact that this alternative idea exists, it hints at maybe a more complex internal state, maybe multiple things driving her.
Well, it definitely speaks to that question of dual realities, doesn't it? The face she showed the world versus the hidden one.
Absolutely.
To her family, her kids, she was, mom, a relative,
Yeah.
functioning, seemingly. To neighbors, just a quiet woman.
Mm-hmm.
But all the while, she's living this secret, violent life, a complete double existence. Her mother-in-law, Valentina Kuznetsova, she mentioned Irina drank heavily and sometimes acted strangely, like pretending to be on the phone, talking to herself.
Rehearsing, maybe.
Possibly. But even noticing that, Valentina said she never thought Irina could be capable of murder.
Yeah.
They were all just in total shock when she was arrested, still hoping the police had messed up.
Wow.
It just shows how well she kept up that facade, even with close family, and how deeply unsettling it is when that mask finally drops.
Completely. The mental gymnastics needed to keep that up.
Mm.
It's chilling. And her kids obviously had to grapple with this horror. Her younger daughter, Anastasia, she was only 12 when her mom was arrested, lived with her.
Yeah, I remember her quote.
It really is. She said something like, "She was always good to me and helped me with homework, even writing poetry. I don't believe what people are saying about her can be true."
Oh, imagine hearing that about your own mother.
It's just, it underlines that shattering impact, doesn't it, when someone's hidden life comes out, forcing the people closest to them to somehow reconcile the person they loved with this monster, the betrayal, the trauma. It's unimaginable.
Truly.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the actual pattern of violence, her modus operandi, which, as we said, went on for 8 agonizing years, 2002 right through to 2010.
Terrifyingly long time.
And her victims were so consistent, elderly women, always, aged between 61 and 89, all living alone, mostly in the Sverdlovsk Oblast region.
And primarily in Krasnoyarsk, her hometown.
Yeah.
Which suggests, a comfort zone. But she did travel, too.
Right, Yekaterinburg, Serov, Akit, Druzhino,
Right.
other cities. It suggests she was willing to go further afield when, I guess, the need struck or opportunities dried up locally.
And what's really striking is how methodical she was in gaining access. Almost ritualistic, like you said. It preyed directly on vulnerability and trust.
How did she typically get in?
Her main tactic was just insidious. She'd pose as a social worker, someone meant to help.
Oh, that's low.
Or she'd offer to redecorate, do odd jobs, fix things around the flat, simple household chores.
Using kindness as a weapon.
Exactly. A calculated breach of trust. It got her inside their homes, their private spaces, where they felt safe, but were actually most vulnerable. The prosecutor described it perfectly. Finding elderly women, getting inside, maybe having tea, asking for water.
Disarming them completely.
Just lulling them into this false sense of security with this veneer of normalcy before the horror began.
It's just so calculating, isn't it? Turning a simple offer of tea into a potential death trap. And once she was inside, the brutality was just horrific and consistent.
Yeah, the method rarely varied.
She'd strike them repeatedly on the head, blunt object, usually an axe or a hammer, reports said.
And the violence was extreme. Some victims, forensic reports showed, were hit up to 24 times.
Yeah.
Skulls just severely damaged.
24 times.
The weapons themselves were often just ordinary things you'd find in a house. A hammer, an iron.
Didn't they mention a statue?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
In one case, disturbingly, a heavy bronze statue of Vladimir Lenin was used. Just grabbed whatever was heavy in at hand, it seems.
God, that's visceral. And after the attack...
She'd often cover their heads with pillows and then just leave them there amidst all the evidence.
So thinking about the victims, their families,
Yeah.
what did this mean for the communities, living with this fear for so long?
Oh, the impact must have been just immense, crushing, pervasive. This wasn't just random violence. It targeted a specific group, elderly women, living alone.
The most vulnerable.
Exactly. The terror of knowing that someone seemingly kind, offering help, could walk into your home and do that, it would shatter anyone's sense of safety. And because it went on for years, that fear just lingered. It changed how people lived, probably made them more isolated. It destroyed trust in those towns. People were just living in constant dread, wondering who was next. Who could you possibly trust?
And beyond the attacks themselves, she sometimes tried to cover her tracks, right? Which adds another layer of calculation.
Yes, in a few cases, about 3, she actually set fire to the victims' homes afterwards.
Trying to make it look like an accident, destroy evidence.
Clearly, a deliberate attempt to conceal the crime, obscure what happened. But there's that other detail you mentioned earlier, which is just deeply unsettling.
The one where she stayed overnight.
Yeah. In one instance, apparently she couldn't find any money to steal, and she allegedly stayed the night in the flat with the deceased victim, covered the victim's face with a pillow.
Stayed overnight.
It speaks to such a profound detachment, doesn't it? Or maybe something even more psychologically twisted. It's hard to even process.
It really is. Setting fires, okay, that's calculated concealment. But staying there...
It suggests something beyond just trying to get away with it. A chilling indifference, maybe, or some bizarre, perverse connection in that moment. It points to a complete void where empathy should be, an absolute lack of it.
That detail just sends chills down my spine. It really does. Horrifying coldness. And this went on, this horror, for 8 long years. Police were stumped, communities terrified, families desperate. Which brings us to the manhunt itself. 8 years of searching, plagued by misdirection, missed clues.
A real testament to the challenges involved.
So let's really get into this. The biggest roadblock, the main reason the investigation stalled for so long, was this huge gender blind spot.
Right. A critical error in assumption.
The police looked at the sheer brutality the force used, those 24 blows you mentioned, and they just couldn't wrap their heads around a woman doing it. They assumed it had to be a man.
Their own words confirm it. One detective said flat out, "I was convinced we were dealing with a man. How could a woman smash a head with 24 blows?"
It's unbelievable bias, isn't it?
Another even admitted they suspected it might be a man dressed as a woman, even when witnesses started mentioning a female attacker.
Wow. So they'd rather believe in a disguise than accept a woman could be that violent?
It seems so. That ingrained stereotype about who commits extreme violence was just such a massive hurdle. It sent them down completely the wrong path for years.
And wasted so much time.
Absolutely. It really highlights how vital unbiased observation is and the dangers of confirmation bias, seeing what you expect to see.
Yeah.
Societal ideas about gender and violence, the idea that extreme brutality is a male thing, it skewed everything. Led them chasing ghosts.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? Criminals don't always fit the neat boxes we put them in. You need an open mind.
Absolutely essential. That bias cost them years, wasted resources, and tragically allowed her to keep going to hurt more people.
And so the investigation just crawled along, agonizingly slow. No real leads, even though they knew the deaths were linked somehow.
The scale of the effort shows their desperation, though. They fingerprinted 15,000 women.
15,000.
Yeah, a massive undertaking, and it got them nowhere. They even chased leads all the way to Turkmenistan. It's like 1,300 miles away.
All based on the wrong profile.
Exactly. And chasing those wrong leads had real consequences, too. Remember, in 2008, they arrested another woman.
Oh, yeah, the wrongful arrest.
Held her for months, put her through hell, and she's completely innocent. It just shows the pressure they were under, the desperation, but also the damage caused by that initial biased focus, impacting innocent lives, prolonging the terror for everyone else.
You can only imagine the frustration from the public, especially the victims' families. It must have just boiled over.
Oh, it did. Pure outrage. Elena Golovinkina, her mother, was killed back in 2002, she put it bluntly. It's scandalous that it took 8 years to catch the killer.
8 years? Scandalous is the right word.
And that delay, with the attack still happening,
Yeah.
it created this awful feeling in the communities, didn't it? This sense of it could be anyone, especially for the elderly women who were the targets.
Constant fear.
Yeah, a total erosion of trust in the police, compounding the trauma, just this shadow of dread hanging over everyone, a community just living in fear.
It's hard to fathom living like that for so long. But then finally, after all those years of dead ends and despair, the net started to close in.
The turning point.
It came in 2010, and it came from someone incredibly brave, an intended victim who survived.
Against all odds, a survivor.
She managed to survive one of these brutal attacks, and she was able to tell the police with absolute certainty her attacker was female.
That one piece of information changed everything.
Wait until you hear this next part, because that single courageous statement completely shifted the investigation's focus, finally dragged it out of that gender-biased quicksand it had been stuck in for years.
Just incredible bravery.
And she didn't just survive. She gave them enough detail, vivid detail, to help create an artist's impression, a composite sketch. Finally, investigators had a face to look for.
It really highlights the power of a survivor's voice, doesn't it? And how one crucial piece of information can crack a case wide open, especially when it shatters a long-held wrong assumption.
Absolutely.
After years chasing shadows, that one report gave them clarity, focus, a real direction. It basically ignited the final stage of the hunt.
It was the pivot, yeah. But tragically, not long after that survivor's report, Irina Gaidamachuk killed again, her final victim, Alexandra Povaritsina.
So close to the end, and another life lost.
But that final, awful act actually led directly to her capture. A neighbor, maybe paying more attention now there was a sketch circulating, saw Gaidamachuk leaving Povaritsina's flat around the time she must have passed away.
An eyewitness. Finally.
That witness account, combined with the definite knowledge they were looking for a woman, finally let the police connect the dots properly.
And this is where it gets fascinating, how all these disparate threads finally came together, right? Once they had the right lens to view them through.
Exactly.
They had been collecting evidence for years. Now, fingerprints from 3 of the recent crime scenes were definitively matched to earlier scenes. Concrete forensic links.
Finally tying them together scientifically.
And then the community chipped in again. Neighbors started recognizing Gaidamachuk from the sketch, remembering her, the woman who'd painted flags or done chores for some of the victims shortly before they died.
So it all converged. Eyewitnesses, forensics, community knowledge.
An undeniable picture. They finally had her.
And so after that 8-year nightmare, the hunt was over. Irina Gaidamachuk was arrested in Krasnoyarsk, June 2010.
And her reaction during questioning was, well, chilling doesn't quite cover it.
No kidding. She apparently confessed pretty quickly, just admitted it, and reportedly said, almost casually, that she'd lost count after the 10th murder.
Right, count. Just think about that. The sheer volume of violence, the number of lives taken, she couldn't even keep track anymore.
It speaks volumes about her detachment, doesn't it?
Profoundly disturbing detachment. And then there was that detective's description of her during the interrogation.
Oh, right. The charming comment.
Yeah, he said she was very cold-blooded, but also charming and even attractive. She even tried flirting during our questioning.
Flirting during a murder interrogation.
It's just, it shatters those stereotypes again, doesn't it, of what a killer looks like or acts like. Shows this terrifying capacity for manipulation, for seeming normal, even charming under the most extreme pressure. That duality is just so hard to grasp.
The sheer audacity, the coldness.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Okay, so she's arrested. She gives this initial confession. Then came the legal part. The trial started February 2012 in Yekaterinburg. But interestingly, remember how she confessed quickly at first?
Yes, during the preliminary investigation.
Well, during the actual trial, she contested the charges, fought them.
Right, which isn't uncommon. It highlights that tension between maybe the shock of capture leading to an initial confession versus later courtroom strategy, or maybe the pressure of interrogation versus the formality of a trial.
Could be, but what was key for her conviction, legally speaking?
The psychiatric evaluation. Despite her showing, some signs of mental illness, the big forensic exam by GNTS SSP Serbsky found her legally sane when the crimes happened.
Legally sane, meaning responsible.
Exactly. Not incapacitated by mental illness during the acts themselves. So she was deemed fully culpable, fully responsible for her actions, even if addiction was the desperate driver. That finding was crucial for the court.
So the trial wraps up June 2012. Irina Gaidamachuk is convicted, 17 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and the sentence,
20 years.
20 years in prison, which apparently was the maximum possible sentence for a woman under Russian law back then.
That was the legal limit, yes.
So looking at that, 17 lives taken, one attempted, and a sentence of 20 years. What does that even mean for justice for those families? It feels, well, incredibly disproportionate, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The public reaction, especially from the victims' families, was exactly that. Outrage. Profound outrage.
Understandably.
They felt the sentence was way too short. Someone calculated it only just over a year per killing. A truly chilling thought.
Yeah.
They argued she should never, ever be freed.
I can't blame them.
It highlights that deep conflict,
Yeah.
between what the law allows as a maximum and what the public, what victims' families feel is true justice, true retribution for such horrific, widespread crimes. That sense of injustice often remains, even when the legal process is followed.
Yeah, that feeling, it must linger. Her case obviously left this huge, dark legacy, not just the individual tragedies, but how it shocked Russia and those nicknames she got.
They really tell a story themselves, don't they?
They do. Raskolnikov in a skirt, referencing Dostoevsky's murderer, pointing to that sort of psychological depth or depravity. Satan in a skirt, just pure evil, basically. She-Wolf of Krasnoyarsk, tying her to her hunting ground. Maniac woman from Sverdlovsk. They all capture this kind of horror and disbelief.
It's the public trying to categorize something almost incomprehensible. And it raises that really vital question, doesn't it? What lessons can we actually learn from something this awful?
Like how to protect vulnerable people better.
Exactly. And how to address those root causes, like severe addiction, before they spiral into such utter devastation. Her place in history is grimly secure, Russia's worst female serial killer.
And globally.
If that count of 17 is accurate, which the evidence and her confession support, she'd be the world's fourth worst female serial killer on record, behind figures like Elizabeth Bathory.
Fourth. Wow.
Her case just shook Russia to its core. It exposed how vulnerable elderly women living alone can be. And it was this terrifying demonstration of where desperate, unchecked addiction can lead. A truly stark reminder that the worst threats can hide behind the most ordinary masks.
That really is a chilling thought to end on. The case of Irina Gaidamachuk, the Satan in a skirt, it's just this stark reminder of those hidden faces of brutality and what happens when they finally emerge. We've looked at who she was, the shocking ordinariness, those agonizing investigation failures, and the chilling, calculated crimes that just tore communities apart.
A truly devastating case.
And as we think about it, that question really does stick with you, doesn't it? How much do our own biases, our preconceptions about who can be violent, actually blind us? What does Irina Gaidamachuk teach us about those hidden monsters and about the destructive power of something like addiction when it goes completely off the rails?
Important questions to consider.
We hope this deep dive has maybe offered some new perspective on this truly unforgettable and deeply disturbing case. A reminder maybe to look a bit closer sometimes at the shadows that can hide right out in the open. Thanks for joining us.